because most people don't have, epiphany moment where suddenly they say, I know what my purpose in life is.
But if the person who called in was suicidal, one of the real important protective factors that we had to try and identify was, do they have a reason for living?
But I think there's a lot of value in recognizing you can pursue your purpose and have a job, and those can be two separate things.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. Today we are joined by Dr. Gabrielle Pfund to discuss all things purpose in life. Gabrielle is a postdoc researcher who has published widely in the field of purpose, and her research to date covers domains of developmental psychology, personality psychology, and how purpose relates to all things health. So in today's episode, we discuss tools to help you cultivate a sense of purpose, how just thinking about a purpose is often inadequate to actually cultivating a purpose in your life, how purpose relates to mental health, mental illness, and cognitive functioning, and how having a purpose can help you buffer the effects of everyday stresses, and much, much more. Now to today's episode with Dr. Gabrielle Pfund on purpose in life. Welcome to the Mental Wellbeing College, where we take a deep dive into the wonderful world of mental wellbeing. Each episode, we take a journey through the evidence with a global subject expert to extract the applicable strategies so you can take steps to improving your mental wellbeing. Dr. Gabrielle Pfund, welcome to the Mental Wellbeing College.
It's so great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's fantastic to have you on as well. We're going to be getting into the heavy stuff today, all things purpose in life. And I'm curious, this is an area that people spend, their whole lives looking into themselves, trying to find or create a purpose in their own life. How do you get into researching into such a deep and profound area in purpose in life?
Yes, definitely. Yes. So I think in undergrad, when I beginning to dabble in research, I was interested in well-being broadly, with a little bit of an emphasis in how well-being and social relationships were connected. The professor I was working with in undergrad had done some purpose research, so I kind of got my first exposure to purpose in that space where it seemed fairly central to college student development and well-being. Then for my PhD program, I worked with Patrick Hill at Washington University in St. Louis, and he is one of the foremost purpose researchers of this era. And at that time, I got a lot more exposure to what purpose meant throughout the lifespan, what exactly purpose was, how central and important it was or is to people at so many stages of life. It was just an idea that kept coming back to me. And over time, my interest in it grew as I realized how crucial it is for so many individuals, but how challenging it can be to find and maintain for many as well.
Some of those benefits on physical health, on psychological health were pretty outstanding and surprising for myself to read through. And I certainly want to dive into some of that with you as well. But in terms of a purpose in life, what is a purpose in life? Because it's a throwaway term that, we talk a lot about in our everyday lives. But from your perspective, what is a purpose in life?
In my research, I think there being two different kinds of purpose. We have purpose in life and sense of purpose. Purpose in life, I more understand to be the overarching aim that one has for their lives, that they're constantly pursuing, that organizes their day-to-day activities and supports their short-term goals. This is a bigger picture idea of something that, to some extent, we want to accomplish in life, but it's not as simple as saying, I want to go to college. That's my purpose in life. It would be a little bigger picture, something like, I want to help heal sick people, where someone goes to college and then becomes a doctor. And so that's something that they can constantly pursue. It's not just a one and done thing. So that's purpose in life. Then there's also sense of purpose. And sense of purpose can be understood as the extent to which one feels that they have personally meaningful goals and directions guiding them through life. So rather than saying, I have a purpose in life or I do not, it's how purposeful do I feel? How high is my sense of purpose? Those two things are going to be connected to each other to some extent, where if you know your purpose in life, you likely have a higher sense of purpose. But if you can't articulate what your purpose in life is, you still are able to feel like what you do matters, to still feel like you have that higher sense of purpose.
In terms of having that sense of purpose, then, is there or are there better purposes than others? Or is it really kind of in the eye of the beholder as to what gives them a sense of purpose in everyday life?
Most research honestly doesn't focus on what people's purpose is. It doesn't really focus on what someone's specific purpose in life is. The majority of research focuses on how high someone's sense of purpose is, how purposeful do they feel. So more of that spectrum experience that is completely distinct from someone specifying what their purpose in life is. That in mind, because most research is focused on I have a low sense of purpose or I have a high sense of purpose, the benefits that purpose offers are not typically tied to what someone's qualitative purpose in life is. It's simply having a higher sense of purpose is connected to these positive outcomes. That said, there's still research lacking on that front. It's likely the case that not all purpose is created equal. There's been a little bit of research that more pro-social purpose in life, so, being more other-oriented is going to be more valuable than more financially oriented purposes in life. But overall, that's still just a few studies. That still doesn't really dive fully into the specifics of that, because sense of purpose is both easier to study and is what typically matters more for the health and well-being outcomes that people often research.
I don't know if you heard of that 3 bricklayers analogy, where you've got kind of someone walks past 3 different bricklayers on a work site and he asks them, what are you doing? And the first bricklayer says, I'm laying a brick. And then the second bricklayer says, I'm doing my job so that I can earn some money. And then the third one says, I'm building a church, which is going to have, a sense of meaning for so many other people, a sense of community for people for thousands of years to come. I don't know whether it says this in the research, but certainly it seems more hopeful and positive to think of it as it's in the eye of the beholder kind of way. But it'd be interesting to see what future research does say about different types of purposes and predictive outcomes there.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think it also fits well into this idea, purpose in life being something really big picture, where someone saying, I'm building this church could also say, right now I'm laying this single brick like the first person, but it's all part of building this church for all the reasons you described. Be an example of how your purpose in life helps you organize your day-to-day activities and your short-term goals. So today I'm laying this brick and then this brick and then this brick, my short-term activities and goals, with all part of this overarching goal to help build this church to bring people together for years to come.
And that's a really interesting point, because that's not the only way to go about finding a sense of purpose, is it? By starting with kind of the higher order, what is my purpose in life? Because I know that, like, for example, in my own 20s, that's how I really tried to go about it, is like, what's my higher order purpose? What's my overarching aim for my life? And to be honest, it kind of caused a little bit of almost purpose anxiety for me. I spent, relentless amounts of time Googling how to find your purpose, literally, 7 tips to finding your purpose, looking at all these like tiny Buddha articles. But looking through your research, you look at different pathways to coming up with gaining a sense of purpose. And that's not the only pathway.
It can be an incredibly daunting, terrifying, and perhaps defeating question to ask yourself, what is my purpose in life? That's a huge question that you're not going to be able to come to in just, after reading a few articles and like one journaling session. But some of a theoretical framework that I helped create with Patrick Hill and Matthias Allemond focused on how we can focus on, or considered how we can focus on purpose as a trait, habit, and state, or the paths model to help people find, develop, and then later maintain a purpose. What you're describing and the approach you are trying to take would be considered a top-down approach in the paths model, where you're focusing on what is my purpose in life, that trait level, that bigger picture question. And then once you figure that out, you can do the smaller things in your day-to-day to organize your life around what your purpose in life is. That is very hard to do, though. Often we recommend instead this bottom-up approach for purpose in life. So rather than thinking of this really high-level, enduring, stable, trait-like purpose in life, we say focus on the smaller day-to-day experiences, what you're doing in a given moment. And think about, as you're going throughout your day, where are the moments that you feel purposeful? That short-term, momentary experience of purpose. If you feel purposeful when you're spending time with your friends, or when you're learning new information, reading a good book, making podcasts, if you're able to identify moments where you feel purposeful, then over time, maybe you can use those moments to find similarities in what all of these experiences have, and start to figure out through instead a bottom-up approach what your purpose in life may be. And this is a little bit more accessible to people, where if you just take moments throughout the day to think, wow, I feel like what I'm doing really matters right now, or it feels personally meaningful to me and makes me feel purposeful, what are those things? And can you integrate them into your day-to-day more? Are there themes in them that can help you understand what might be meaningful purpose in life to you?
So this is kind of the mix between like doing and thinking, right? I think the approach that I took and perhaps the top-down approach that you're referring to is kind of the thinking your way into what's my purpose, whereas this bottom-up approach is more, okay, what are you actually doing right now? And then think about that and reflect on that and then do more of that. So kind of iterating based on what you feel like you're doing already gives you a sense of purpose.
Yeah, I think to some extent, I think across all contexts, thinking, feeling, and behaving are going to be part of it. I just think the top-down approach is really challenging for most people because most people don't have, epiphany moment where suddenly they say, I know what my purpose in life is. And without a moment like that, it's going to be really hard to, figure that out for yourself. Something that I think fits with this idea as well is there are 3 theoretical pathways to purpose that a paper from Cashin and McKnight in 2009 talk about. To this point, there hasn't been that much research on them. There's been a little bit, but they're more theoretical in nature. But these 3 pathways to purpose kind of describe how someone may discover their purpose in life. The first pathway is a reactive pathway to purpose. And I think this is really the main pathway where someone could take that top-down approach and say, I have my purpose in life. I know what it is. How can I integrate it into my daily life? So this reactive pathway focuses on someone having some sort of experience and then that leading to their purpose in life. So the reactive pathway to purpose would be something along the lines of, somebody's grandparent gets cancer, and then because of that, they decide they want to go to medical school and become a cancer researcher. It's often beautiful to hear about these experiences from individuals, though it can also be really sad and harrowing, a lot of the things that help shape people's purpose, that reactive pathway. However, it's not something that we can encourage of people. When we think about intervention efforts to help people find a purpose, we can't say, hey, go face something really hard and then maybe that'll be your purpose. That's not how life works. And hopefully a lot of these negative experiences can be avoided for individuals. So because of that, the question becomes, if you haven't had this life experience that ends up, dramatically shaping and changing the trajectory of your life and the discovery of your purpose, what are the other options for you? One of the other ones is the proactive pathway to purpose. And I think this is something that the PATHS model, that bottom-up approach in the PATHS model, taps into really nicely. Or the proactive pathway to purpose focuses on going out and trying new things and engaging in new activities and figuring out what are the things that click for you? What are the things that make you feel purposeful that could be valuable in helping you understand what your purpose in life may be? So that goes back to this idea of engaging in a certain behavior, reflecting upon it, seeing how it makes you feel, and whether that could be a valuable path for you to pursue as you discover your purpose in life. Then the third pathway to purpose is the social learning pathway. And so the social learning pathway often focuses on, your social connections with others, especially people like mentors, and understanding, what is their purpose in life, and also how did they come about discovering it. So this one's a little bit more similar to, modeling your behavior after people that you respect or people that you feel like have been a mentor who can guide you. Of the pathways, this is the one that I feel the least clear about how it might fit neatly into people's daily lives. But something that is talked about with, the discovery of purpose in life and just the existence of purpose in general is social support and a social network is really valuable for the pursuit of purpose. Having someone that you really respect and either kind of emulating how they live their life and pursue their purpose, or simply asking, how they got here could be another way to find your purpose.
I think I've seen you directly, Gabrielle, talk about the role perhaps of like academic advisors for college students playing a role in that social learning side of things.
Yes, definitely. So for college students in particular, college is a time, excitement, but also challenges and opportunity for great self-discovery that can be both thrilling and exhausting. During the college experience, it's really valuable for students to have people that they trust, that they can look up to, that can help kind of guide them through the unanticipated forks in their paths and figure out what works best for them individually. And academic advisors are people who can have a really positive and influential path in this process if there's enough of a rapport and an understanding of the student built up that they can make individualized recommendations for them. Another thing with academic advisors is it's often the case that they know a lot of opportunities both at the university and beyond that students themselves might not know about, which means that they can, widen the paths that the students even think are possible.
And it feels like the role of these academic advisors, or indeed a mentor, is not perhaps to say this is what's best and direct, but rather to kind of, like you alluded to there, broaden the perspective of different options, give different ideas, perhaps even just be like a sounding board for the ideas to come from within the person themselves, but to ask the right questions. Like in therapy, we call it Socratic questioning, where the answers are within the individual themselves, but by asking the right type of questions, you give them a different perspective of their own worldview that they otherwise wouldn't have on their own.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting that. I agree.
And in the way of like academic advisors, I came across this American organization called, I think it's the Future Project. It's like this organization where they send in, they call them dream directors, but it's a similar concept in the sense that they're like advisors of sorts or mentors to high school students who do workshops and have these conversations that we're talking about, where they might, suggest different ideas, and the idea being to instill a sense of curiosity and help the individual, the high school student, find a sense of authenticity by exploring different interests. So I really like that, because particularly in high school, I think there can be a lot of value for people who are exploring their identities, right? And I've heard it being called flirting with your multiple self. I think that's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, it feels like it kind of brings together both the proactive and social learning aspects of things. Not only is someone trying new things, but they have someone who's kind of guiding them along and asking these questions to help make sure they're thinking about the right things as they're figuring themselves out. And you brought up identity. And with adolescents and college students, there's been a fair amount of work that looks at how identity development and purpose development kind of co-occur, and they really are strongly tied to each other. As you're figuring out who you are, you're going to have a little bit more clarity on what it is that matters to you and what you value and what you want to pursue for your life. And once you have some clarity on that, that can also help you better understand yourself. Figuring out your purpose and who you are strongly connected to each other, especially at that age.
And I think the common theme that I'm hearing and reading through your work as well, particularly with that proactive path, is got to be this understanding that it's going to take time, that you're going to have to experiment, that you're going to have to explore, and you don't stumble upon it straight away.
Yeah, the best things in life don't just happen. And purpose is something that's meaningful and valuable and, personally empowering and exciting and passion-inducing to have and to pursue. Because it's all those things, you can't just snap your fingers and it suddenly arrive. It takes a lot of, effort and reflection for most people. And that doesn't mean stop trying. That just means if it hasn't happened yet, don't feel defeated or discouraged. You're one step closer. And
it might seem like a very simple concept, but if I'm honest, in my own journey, Gabrielle, I really did think that I could just, Google my way into finding a purpose and completely neglected the need for exploration part. Do you see that, or, in young people yourselves that you may have talked to, or do you feel that that's the message that is sent, whether it's from media or self-help books, or what's the current message from your point of view?
What I'm going to say might be more specific to the United States. I don't really know how this functions in other countries, but in the US, I think there's been this common theme over the past couple decades that as a high school student, your next step is to go to college. And when you go to college at most universities, you need to know what you're studying pretty early on. So there's this pressure put on students who, while in high school, have their day-to-day fully dictated by their university or by their school and their parents and their classes, and they have homework and they have all these activities that they have some freedom in selecting, but overall, a lot of things are required of them and they're given very little freedom. Then all of a sudden they're told, hey, you need to go to college. This is the path, which is not the right path for everyone. So that's its own, problem in its own lie to force everyone to take the same path. Then they show up at university and they say, okay, this is where you're supposed to be. Do the thing that you've always dreamed of. And they're like, well, I haven't actually dreamed of anything yet because I've always just been told this is the path I must take. And now I'm at the last clear step on this path and I don't know who I am or what I want to do, yet I'm here. paying a lot of money in the US anyway. And I still don't even know what I want to study or what I want to care about. And so we have all this pressure put on students to take this really demanding path where it's their first time really making a choice for themselves without actually knowing why they're there beyond it just being told to them. That ended up being a little bit of a rant, but to kind of bring it back to your original question, I don't think adolescents, high school students have ever really had the chance to really reflect on themselves in a meaningful way. Not everyone, but for many, that would help them be in a place to, really smoothly obtain a purpose without that exploration process. Because to this point, many haven't had the opportunity to explore who they are or what they want because that's been fairly dictated to them.
That's such an important point. And that certainly rings true in my own experience, the implicit pressure. And there's a path that's already laid out for you of high school, going to college. It's not even a question about the decision being made. It's already made. So it certainly rings true here in Australia. And I wonder how we can create more room for individuals to explore themselves. And I think certainly going back in my own experience, if I'd taken a gap year, like after high school, I think that really would have helped me to just explore before just going into university and going on to the next step, so to speak. But I don't know if you've kind of contemplated on different ways you could create more of that room for young people?
Yes, definitely. I was talking to someone recently about gap years and how that would help so many new college students, because by that point, they've had a little bit of that freedom where they're making their own choices. So when they go to university, they have a better idea of who they are and what they want and what they want to pursue. But because we give, people graduate high school and then 3 months later, it's like, okay, you're at college. Now take all of these classes that are much harder than anything you've ever been used to about things you might not even care about. And maybe along the way, you'll have a time to take a breath and figure out why you're here and what you're doing. I think gap years could be really helpful for a lot of people. I think also ending the narrative that everyone must go to college to be successful would be valuable as well. For many people, college degrees are going to be really impactful in helping them pursue what they want. However, if you don't know what you want yet, then pursuing a college degree could require a lot of time and money that might not end up being necessary for you to take the path that's most meaningful to you. And then one other important point here is I also think your job doesn't have to be your purpose. Most of us, we need to have jobs because we need to pay the bills and keep a house over our head and hopefully to some extent be able to travel and do things that bring us joy. But I often think in the US and I'm sure many other countries where work ends up being like its own culture, it feels like our purpose must be found at work. But I think there's a lot of value in recognizing you can pursue your purpose and have a job, and those can be two separate things. It can be really convenient and sometimes really rewarding if those are the same thing. But I think to tell everyone your purpose in life must be your job can end up being really defeating for a lot of people if their purpose can't pay the bills. That doesn't mean they can't pursue their purpose. That just means their job is what they do to make money, and then they are able to pursue their purpose on the side.
Very pertinent point as well, I think, for college students, because certainly in the college or university culture, I think that is an implicit message as well, is that there's such a huge weight on your career being everything and really defining who you are as a person, really.
Yeah. And I mean, that said, I do think it's dangerous to choose a career path solely for money. If you're saying, I know a lot of people who decided to go to law school just because it would pay a lot of money and they're really miserable. So I think your job doesn't have to be your purpose, but also don't choose a job solely for making like the largest amount of money you can, because that can, one, depending on the job, it can be so demanding in time you can't do these other things that are meaningful to you. But two, there's a point where it could make you fairly miserable if you hate what you're doing. So you can... Your job cannot be your purpose, but hopefully to some extent you still like your job.
Certainly sound advice for those exploring their careers at the moment. I want to go back as well, Gabrielle, to something you mentioned earlier about journaling and about kind of writing to find purpose. So this was something that I found really helpful when, in the absence of having that academic advisor or a mentor or someone external to me to ask those right questions, is just to get things out on paper. Now, I haven't seen any research on this, but like I said, anecdotally, just journaling about my values and about what's important to me really helps kind of to unlock the answers that are inside of me by putting them out on paper?
There's been a tiny bit of research, not much, but a tiny bit of research that looked at how asking people to reflect on their purpose in life might help increase their sense of purpose. And we do see that in the short term, journaling can be valuable to help bolster individuals' sense of purpose. When you think of the paths model I was describing earlier, I think journaling could be a really powerful mechanism to help promote purpose in the sense that it often forces you to reflect in a way that if you're not sitting down with a pen and paper or having a conversation with someone who has some experience and knowledge in the area, you're not going to get the opportunity to really say, okay, let me think about what I've done today. What is it that really felt personally meaningful to me? What is it that felt kind of exhausting to me? What is it that put me in a bad mood? All of these things throughout the day that kind of make your day as a whole, kind of isolating what it is that brought you down versus what lifted you up. And when we assess sense of purpose, we will ask people to respond to a wide variety of questions on a scale of 1, strongly disagree, to 6, strongly agree. How well do these items describe you? And we have items like, to me, the things I do are worthwhile, and I have a sense of direction and purpose in my life. If someone said 6, strongly agree to both of those items, then that would represent them having a high sense of purpose. But I think those kind of items are a good cue for the kinds of things that people can reflect upon when they're journaling and thinking about their day and thinking about what might be their purpose, to kind of figure out what are some things that I might want to integrate in my day-to-day or find ways to remove from my day-to-day to the extent that's possible to help me raise my sense of purpose. The next time with someone journaling, they could think, what are the things today that I did that I think are worthwhile? The answer is nothing. Sometimes we're just going to have days like that. Human existence, unfortunately, is not all joy and purposeful pursuit. Someone's consistently saying, I feel like I'm just spending my days doing things that don't matter. I'm just, watching a bunch of TikToks or Netflix or whatever. These things don't actually feel worthwhile. What is something that could feel worthwhile? Try it out and then see were you right. And over time, hopefully people can identify activities that they can integrate in their day-to-day to help them feel a little bit more purposeful.
And I think certainly reflecting on what we did as children might have some value as well, because when everyone's a child, right, you just do things because they're enjoyable in the moment, this sense of play. Obviously, as we age, our identity develops as well, and that might look different, but perhaps there can be patterns there to reflect upon. For me, it was like I spent all my waking hours in the backyard and I love sport, and now I'm never going to be a professional athlete, but that helped me kind of identify a career in health and fitness for a little while as well. Perhaps that could be a lens as well that people can draw upon what's intrinsically valuable to them, but, just draw a bridge to how they can make it work in their adult life.
And I think it could differ for people as well. For me, what makes me feel most purposeful is research. Trying to connect that to my childhood is a little bit tricky, but there are things that I was a fairly curious child. I always had questions about things. So that kind of thing could then connect to a path in research.
In the way of finding or creating and cultivating a purpose, we've covered a lot of different paths, as you termed it, or pathways. Are there any other tips, strategies, protocols that we haven't covered that you think could be really useful for college students? Anyone indeed trying to cultivate their purpose?
I think I kind of said implicitly in some of my previous statements, but to just state it more explicitly, if you haven't figured out what your purpose in life is, but you have identified things that make you purposeful, try each day to do one of those things at least once. At the end of the day, when you reflect on your day, even if you don't fully understand what's next, where you're going, what you're trying to pursue, you can still look back on a moment and say, but that thing mattered to me. That's something I wanted for myself that I did that helped me feel purposeful. And over time, that will create purposeful habits in an individual. And maybe that could give some clarity down the line with these things that kind of become automatic to engage in, these purposeful activities that are likely unique to the individual, but that they're integrating their day-to-day life in an automatic, habitual way. They could potentially clarify your purpose in life. And if they don't, that's totally okay too. It's a long path. Those activities making you feel purposeful on their own is inherently valuable. regardless of what they mean for your overarching life aim down the road.
I love it. That certainly gives, I think, people a really good place to start because it seems very actionable and concrete and something that everyone can readily kind of implement. And, when I was coming across this purposeful habits, this actually really draws parallels with this term behavioral activation that we use a lot with clients with depression or major depressive disorder, as the clinical term is, where the idea being that we kind of mood monitor, we track their last 7 days, look at what gave them a higher sense of mood or in what particular contexts. So this is more about mood and feeling a sense of positivity than purpose. But the idea being reflecting upon that and then working out and problem solving in therapy, how can we implement more of that moving forward? The structure underneath that seems very similar. I don't know if the roots are from behavioral activation or not, but it does seem to draw a lot of parallels there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot in the clinical literature that is deeply interwoven with purpose, especially since purpose is such a powerful and emotionally intimate experience in a lot of ways. We see that people with much lower sense of purpose are more likely to have higher depressive symptoms. So purpose is something that we believe can be fairly protective for individuals' mental health in a wide range of contexts. But yes, I think these things are very tied to each other, and also experiences of positive and negative emotions can be tied to experiences of purpose in the short term. This was actually part of some of my dissertation work that's not published yet. But in moments or on days where individuals felt that they had a higher sense of purpose, they typically experienced more positive emotions and fewer negative emotions. But something to note here is short-term purpose is more strongly tied to positive emotions than to negative emotions. So to kind of translate that, there are likely moments where you're going to feel purposeful, but you might also be experiencing negative emotions, because sometimes the things that give us the most meaning could also be a little bit stressful or could also be a little bit demanding, or might just for a short period of time make us feel a little negative. Like when I'm having to edit a paper for the 4th time, it can be a little stressful, but I really care about being able to communicate that research to people. So because of that, I cope with the temporary negative emotions while also feeling a higher sense of purpose in that moment, because these things align with my purpose overall.
That ties into a really important message as well, I think, about the value of stress and not always running away from it, because that's certainly a message I think that's implicitly hammered into us, that stress is bad. Don't do what's stressful. But like you said, things that are meaningful, things that are challenging can often involve an element of stress that you need to endure. And that's what kind of makes it more meaningful when you're able to have those sense of accomplishments as well.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that.
And in terms of stress as well, this was really fascinating, the relationship between purpose and stress. Can you tell us a little bit about this relationship?
In a study by Patrick Hill and colleagues from 2018, this is one of my favorite papers that he ever led. Every day for I think 10 days, individuals reported on whether they experienced a stressor, how the extent to which they experienced positive emotions that day, and the extent to which they experienced negative emotions that day. People who had a higher sense of purpose experienced the same number of stressors as those who had a low sense of purpose. Having a high purpose does not protect you from experiencing a stressor. We're all experiencing stressors. What gets really interesting with this study, though, is that for individuals who had a higher sense of purpose, when experiencing a stressor, they didn't experience as much of an increase in negative emotions. So while across the board experiencing stressors increased people's negative emotions, for those who had a higher sense of purpose, that increase was a lot smaller. Having a higher sense of purpose has been tied to lower stress reactivity. So by having a higher sense of purpose, it's not going to protect you from the experience of stressors, but in the moment of experiencing a stressor, it could help protect you from the negative impact of that stressor.
This is super interesting. The stress buffer effect of purpose in life.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Purpose in life is such a positive impact in that sense and is able to buffer us from the longer term effects of stress.
Some of my recent work has focused on how sense of purpose connects to emotion regulation. In one study that I think has been published now, we look at the connection between purpose and different emotion regulation strategies in a cross-sectional study with a wide age range. And what we found is that for individuals who had a higher sense of purpose, they were more likely to engage adaptive emotion regulation strategies like focusing on the big picture and finding a silver lining. and less likely to engage with maladaptive emotion regulation strategies like eating or drinking to cope, avoiding the problem, ruminating on it. So I think part of what's happening here is that individuals with a higher sense of purpose might be more likely or more able to figure out how that stressor fits into their overarching life aims or fits into what they're working toward. And so, yes, it's stressful, but it's part of something that matters. That might help combat some of the negative emotions relative to someone who has a low sense of purpose, who might just be ruminating on it and thinking, oh my gosh, this is horrible. This is awful. Like, I don't want to deal with this. Well, if you have a higher sense of purpose, the stressor might be horrible. It might be awful, but because you recognize how it fits into your bigger picture, you're able to combat some of those negative emotions that would be festering otherwise.
Broadening the perspective, I think you guys term it, and less likely to sweat the small stuff, given you've got that broader perspective of, okay, does this fit into my purpose? Does it really affect that overarching aim? No, not really. I'm readily able to move on compared to someone who perhaps lacks that.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And I think it's really important to remember here that it's not that people with a higher sense of purpose aren't experiencing stressors. Life is still stressful. It's just a matter of how you perceive the stressor in front of you.
There's that train study. I know we mentioned it over email. That's a really interesting one, right? Where you've got people who go into a train on their commute, and the ones who see that in their train car, it's more of, there's a high percentage of ethnic outgroup. So people who are less like them in terms of their ethnicity. And that can be a distressing experience. And indeed it was for people, but people who like wrote about their purpose beforehand were less likely to have a higher stress response than those who didn't. And indeed people who had a higher purpose in life had less stress reactivity to that experience of being an ethnic outcast in their train car, which I thought was really fascinating, because some of the experiments that has been done here are really, just really interesting and unique.
Yes. Yeah. And I think at this point, it's still, the mechanisms behind that study are still not fully understood. But as you're saying, people who went through this condition of, let me increase your sense of purpose through reflection, through journaling, were more tolerant of the situation, which I think is really exciting when we're thinking about a space where there's a lot of prejudice and bias and discrimination. What is it that we can do to help at a more, I guess in this case, an individual level, to kind of combat some of people's more systemic experiences? And in this study, it's still, there's been a little bit of follow-up work, but I'm still not entirely clear on how this is working, which is exciting because it just means there are more opportunities for research to kind of figure things out. But I think that was one study where, having talked to Pat many years after it happened, they thought it could be the case, but when it played out the way it did, they were a little surprised and excited too.
I was certainly surprised reading into that one. Are there other areas, Gabrielle, of mental health that purpose in life is protective of or is associated with better outcomes, so to speak?
Yeah, so generally sense of purpose is strongly tied to most mental health outcomes. So people with a higher sense of purpose in general experience more positive emotions, fewer negative emotions, are less reactive to stressors, as we've talked about.
Yep.
They typically experience fewer depressive symptoms and fewer anxiety symptoms. That effect is a bit less strong than the depressive symptoms, but we still see that it's negatively associated with anxiety. I'm trying to think of other mental health.
Not one I've seen in the research, but one anecdotally that I see is with suicide. Worked at the National Crisis Hotline, suicide hotline here in Australia called Lifeline. If a person was suicidal, not everyone who called was, but if a person who called in was suicidal, one of the real important protective factors that we had to try and identify was, do they have a reason for living, which I think kind of taps into the idea of having a purpose. And, you know, that famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, the idea I think that he observed in concentration camps, he's a psychiatrist who was in concentration camps during the Nazi occupation. He observed that people who were able to tap into some sort of higher order meaning, a purpose for their survival, were less likely to give up or run into the wire, which was the electrically charged barbed wire at the concentration camps. Again, not one I've seen in research, but it certainly makes intuitive sense that can be protective in those really dire circumstances.
Yes, definitely. I know there's been a little bit of work that's looked at sense of purpose and suicidal ideation. And typically people with a higher sense of purpose have less suicidal ideation. It's not a literature I'm very familiar with, but if you think about the kinds of questions that sense of purpose measures asks, so one question that's asked to reflect someone who has a low sense of purpose is, my daily activities are trivial and unimportant to me. If someone wakes up and every day thinks that their daily activities are trivial and unimportant to me, I think that's capturing more than just someone not having a high sense of purpose. I think it is tapping into this broader depressive context, is more of a clinical concern beyond saying, I don't know what I want to do with my life. I don't know what my purpose in life is. And I think having a purpose in life helps people find activities that aren't trivial, that aren't unimportant. It helps people figure out what matters to them and why they're doing what they're doing. So in the context of lows and many other areas of life, whether that be, relationships or health or, intrapersonal, having a purpose ends up giving an anchor of sorts or a North Star for people to focus on in a context where everything else might feel really turbulent.
That's so important, I think, as well. And so true, because, what really characterizes, if you look at depression, right, is this lack of energy for life. And there's a lot of withdrawal from day-to-day activities. Some people will literally struggle to get out of bed, but purpose in life can be this kind of activating energy, like a North Star, like you said, to pull you towards and can help you to engage more in life, where depression is characterized by disengagement from all activities.
Slightly different, sample and context, but there was a study, or I went to a talk at a conference many years ago. I don't know if the study ended up being published, but it was looking at older adults with chronic pain who had pets, and they talked about how their pets helped them feel more purposeful, because even when their pain was bad and it was hard for them to get up in the morning, their dog brought them a sense of joy, but also gave them a reason beyond themselves to keep going. So pets, another way to find your purpose.
Yeah. Never had a pet, but I've heard a lot of good things about having pets. In fact, you know what? Working at Lifeline, that was actually one of the, whenever we asked that question of, reasons for living, often it was my dog, my cat, my whatever. So that certainly taps into something there.
Yes, agreed.
What about physical health outcomes, Gabrielle? Because there's a lot of work being done on that. And this again kind of blew my mind, just how predictive of better physical outcomes purpose in life is.
Kind of combining some physical and cognitive health outcomes together, just to give you a broad overview. People with a higher sense of purpose are at lower risk for dementia, they experience slower cognitive decline. They're at lower risk for heart disease, stroke, are at lower risk for mobility disability, and finally, they live longer lives. When accounting for a lot of these predictors of mortality, people with a higher sense of purpose live longer. And there's been some research that has kind of helped us understand why this is happening, some of the mechanisms here, because anytime we see purpose predicts A, B, or C, people always ask, why, which is a really important question for us to be able to establish the pathway between purpose and successful aging. But purpose is connected to a lot of salubrious health behaviors. We see that individuals with a higher sense of purpose are more likely to rely on preventative health care. They also are more likely to engage in exercise, whether that be moderate activity like going on walks or more vigorous physical activity like running and weightlifting. There's also been some work that finds that people with a higher sense of purpose are more likely to brush their teeth, which is considered sort of like the linchpin of health behaviors, where if you're someone who brushes your teeth, you likely do all of the other good things that you're supposed to do, like eat vegetables, exercise, all of that. Sense of purpose is connected to a wide range of valuable health outcomes. And part of that is because the health behaviors it promotes that in turn promote these health outcomes. If
you're brushing your teeth, that's the first step to changing your life.
There you go. Yeah. If you can get that done, everything else will follow. Or no, not brushing your teeth. Sorry, flossing. Flossing specifically. Hopefully you're brushing your teeth. Flossing specifically. If you floss, you do all of the other good things. So yes. Hopefully, yeah, brushing your teeth, more people do, but flossing, no matter how many people tell their dentist they floss, most people don't.
Didn't expect to learn that coming into our conversation today.
There we go. Yep.
So with these outcomes, these kind of physical and cognitive outcomes, this relationship between purpose in life and better cognitive health, cardiovascular health, this holds even when you control for baseline health. Is that right?
Yeah. So I think I'm trying to think through the different studies on this, but like with the cognitive aging literature, one of the things that we look at with purpose is what is the actual connection between how sense of purpose predicts the rate at which their cognitive functioning declines in older adulthood. Inherent in this analytic approach is we account for the fact that some people simply start out having better cognitive functioning. Initial cognitive functioning in older adulthood is associated with sense of purpose. But after even accounting for that relationship, we see that older adults with a higher sense of purpose decline in their cognitive functioning at a lower rate relative to older adults with a lower sense of purpose who are declining in cognitive functioning more quickly.
That certainly blew my mind when I read through that. And I think this literature on like blue zones as well, I haven't looked into it too much, but I think even purpose in life in some of these blue zones where people have like the longest lifespan in the world, places like Japan, purpose in life they've identified along with, the exercise, the nutritional habits is actually one of those predictive factors in these zones. So really speaking to, I think, the power of purpose in life.
Yes, I agree. I don't have much to add on that, except purpose is great.
Yeah. Well, speaking of adding to that, is there anything you think that we haven't covered that we should, because we have covered a lot of bases on purpose in life?
Yeah, I feel like we got the review of a lot of the major things.
Me too. That was very concise, but we covered a lot of different areas. I'm curious. My final question then for you, Gabrielle, to put you on the spot, if you don't mind, is, what's your purpose in life? I'm sure you get this one a lot from people as a purpose in life researcher.
It's interesting because this is a question I get a lot, but I've never come up with a really clear answer. And I think part of what is really challenging with purpose in life and people having a purpose in life is it can be difficult to articulate because, as I said, it shouldn't be a single goal. It should be like an ongoing thing that you're able to constantly pursue. But mine would likely be something that involves, discovering new knowledge that hopefully helps make the world a little bit better. And there are times where I discover new knowledge and it might not make the world better, but it's still, always fun to learn something new. And then other times where hopefully it does help life improve a little bit. But this is I think, a helpful example of a purpose in life in the sense that it's something that will always be pursuable. That's not a great word, but it's something that I can always pursue. It's not just going to happen and then be done and there's no more knowledge and no one to help. There's always going to be more to learn and more to do and more to understand.
Certainly seems like coming on this podcast and communicating, the wonderful research that you and others have done in this area certainly ties in with that purpose and helping and bettering other people's lives.
Yes, definitely. I think I often don't get opportunities to talk about this research outside of the academic context at universities, at academic conferences. And while that's helpful, pipeline between the research that we do, people finding out this knowledge, non-academics finding out this knowledge is incredibly long and often very convoluted. And so it's really exciting to be in a space where this knowledge sharing is hopefully a little more direct and helpful and encouraging to people outside of fellow researchers.
Certainly, I'm sure that it's certainly going to be the case for people tuning into this discussion. And thank you, Gabrielle, for your wonderful research. I said many times during our discussion that it was very enlightening, surprising, and mind-blowing at times to read through some of the work that you've published, which has been, really fantastic for my own knowledge, and I'm sure for many people listening. So thank you for your research and for your time and wisdom that you've shared today on the Mental Wellbeing College.
Thank you for inviting me, and I enjoyed getting to talk to you about all of it.